Hey everyone, my name is Masha and in this video I'm going to teach you how to keep your bracelets straight when you're making normal patterns. So the idea for this video came once I made this bracelet. I made it for a friend and I did a video on it, and once I finished making it I realized that it was incredibly wonky. Like, you can actually see that it is completely bent on this side. And if you look at the sides here, you can see that some of the sides are bent as well. So this was obviously not a very well made bracelet, and I couldn't figure out why because I was following the pattern exactly as it was telling me, but then it still came out wonky. So after I made this video, I did some research and I actually found a bunch of other people's videos and some online tutorials talking about how there is a special technique that lets you keep the edges of your bracelets straight. And I'm going to credit all the resources I used when I learned how to do this down in the description, but I thought I'd make a video for it to teach you guys as well. So then I tried this technique, and the second bracelet, which used the exact same pattern, turned out much neater and much straighter. So the secret to keeping the edges of your bracelet straight is actually quite simple. On the left edge, you keep one string that is going to be the string for the edge, and you only make backward-forward knots onto it. And on the right side you also have a string, and you only make forward-backward knots on this string. So essentially all the strings that you have in the middle, the ones that you weave with, make backward-forward knots on the left and forward-backward knots on the right onto the strings that are for the edge. So for the strings that are inside, you do make a knot of its color, but you don't take the string outside further than the edge. It always comes back. And I'm going to show you how to do this with any pattern, but that is the basics of the technique. So you might be wondering, how do you make backward-forward knots on the left and forward-backward knots on the right if that is not what the pattern suggests? And looking at the original pattern for this bracelet, you can see that both on the left and on the right edges, most of the knots are forward knots. And so the answer to this in this particular pattern is, if you look at all the knots that are forward knots, they are made between two threads of the same color. In my case, they're two black threads. So whichever knot you make between these two black threads is not going to make a difference. So if you have two threads of the same color on the edge, just change it to a backward-forward knot if it's on the left edge, and to a forward-backward knot if it's on the right edge. So all of these knots we are able to change, and therefore we can make the new pattern and follow this one. And if you do that, then the edges of the bracelet will be much straighter than if you don't. You can also see that on row 5, for example, we have the pink thread that comes in and already does a backward-forward knot. So there we don't have to change anything. And so, apart from the knots between the two black threads, we don't have to change anything and we can continue making the bracelet like this. But what if you have a bracelet where you can't do that, where you don't have two threads of the same color? So let's look at this pattern. So this is another pattern that I tried the technique with, and I think it turned out pretty well. As you can see, this is me trying the technique, and the edges of the bracelet turned out really straight. In this bracelet you can also very clearly tell that I have two separate strings for the edges. It's actually physically visible in the back of the bracelet. Anyway, back to the pattern. As you can see in the pattern, all of the knots on the edges of the bracelet are made between two threads of different colors, so I can't just go ahead and change the knots. That won't work. So to solve this problem, what you do is you add two extra strings either side of the bracelet. These strings are not going to be visible in your bracelet because you're never going to be making a knot of its color. You're only going to be making knots onto them. But you add them on either side of the bracelet, and if you look closely you can see that on some of the rows there are bits of string sticking out that are unused, that go there and back, either direction. Those will be the strings that you make forward, backward and backward, forward knots with. So you add two strings and you add all these extra knots, and then you just make your bracelet like that. The pattern is not going to change from you doing that, because you are adding two strings, you're not going to be using those, you're not making any knots of those colors, so the pattern isn't changing at all. And exactly as I showed you, this is the exact same pattern that I was using. The pattern did not change even though I added two extra strings either side. So those two extra strings act as edges and they sort of stabilize your bracelet, which is why this works. So let me quickly demonstrate on a different bracelet that I'm making. So I like the pattern so much that I decided to make another bracelet. So this bracelet uses the exact same pattern as the previous one. As you can see, I added two strings of a different color. So these strings, the strings that I added for the edges, are actually pink. And you can see that they're not visible in the bracelet at all. I have this dark purple, the lighter, and the light purple, and nowhere in the bracelet can you see the pink strings because they're not being used. I'm just making forward backward knots on the right side and backward forward knots on the left side. So yeah, that's how you do it. You just make forward backward knots on the right side, backward forward knots on the left side. You add strings in patterns where you need to. You don't add strings in patterns in which you don't need to. So in this pattern I just changed the pattern up a little bit, and that's how you do it. Forward backward knots, backward forward knots, stabilize the bracelet and keep it in shape. Alright, there you have it. That's how you keep the edges of your normal bracelets straight. So if you ever make anything based on any of my videos, I always love it when you guys send me pictures on Instagram, whether that be via DMs or via tagging me in posts. I post videos every Tuesday and Saturday, and I will see you on Saturday. Bye!